Coogs House, the Houston Cougars got a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row. But is this year's more favorable, and why?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs if you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by. And it is March, so I anticipate there's a handful of you out there. Please be sure to subscribe down below. That way, latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And if you've got us on YouTube, welcome back. It is so good to see you again. We're doing a giveaway every 500 subscribers if you don't remember, so hit subscribe and let's go there. We're at about 2,100, just under that. So hit subscribe, help us get to the next big marker. We're doing a giveaway. Like and comment video to let us know you're in that contest. If you don't know what to say after talking about March Madness this whole time, you just want to get completely far away, different from March Madness, tell us what signals to you that it's the springtime. All right, so today's episode is going to be looking at that March Madness bracket, talk some about seeding and the party that was. Moreover, after that, talking about some of the more challenging teams of potential matchups in Houston's region at first glance. And last but not least, the Big 12 feels a little slighted, and I think we should talk about that as well. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn, and we're breaking all things down today, courtesy of LinkedIn. More on that later. But first, let's talk about the seeding and the party. Houston, it was not a secret by any stretch. It would have taken a catastrophe of Big 12 tournament to fall out of being the 1 seed in the South Regional. However, Houston did claim the first seed in the South Regional, and will play in Memphis the first opening weekend on Friday and Sunday, and then play in Dallas the following weekend on Thursday and Saturday, I believe, because that's actually Easter weekend. I don't know that they'll be playing in Dallas on Easter. And then the Final Four, obviously, the weekend after that on Saturday, and the championship game on Monday, if they were to get down there and cut the nets like we want them to in Phoenix. So really, really good path from a regional perspective. Memphis is a trip Houston fans have made in the past for conference games as recently as last year. Familiar with the trip and all of that kind of stuff. It's also not so far away. Obviously, Dallas is just, about 4 hours up 45 from the city of Houston. American Airlines Center, Pro Stadium, all that good stuff. Not super far away. And then the Final Four is in Phoenix. You can't control where that is, but Phoenix is a fairly straight shot. It's not like it's some crazy distance. Final Four is the Final Four. You're going to go wherever that is every year. I would certainly say that Phoenix seems a lot more fun than Indianapolis, as much fun as Indianapolis was. I think there's a lot of thought on this bracket and on this quarter of the big bracket. Houston's one of 4 number 1 seeds. The number 1 overall seed was UConn. They won the Big East Conference tournament. They got to stay number 1 overall. Houston is technically the second number 1 seed, meaning that if they were to meet in Final Four finals matchup with UConn, they'd have to wear their dark jerseys. They get to pick second, I guess, too, so it picks the South, obviously. Purdue came in third. They had the Midwest Regional. And then North Carolina had the 4th number 1 seed, got whatever was left. They have to go out west and play in the West Regional. And a lot of people saw big brand names all over Houston's region and got, I think, a little scared. And I have to say, understanding that in March you're going to play talented teams, because you're playing teams that either won their small conference or made March Madness as a tournament, right? Like, you're not going to play scrubs. Those teams don't make it this far. I really think Houston got a pretty good draw, a pretty favorable draw. Now, we know Houston's battered and worn out. They have to get some health in their system between now and Friday. But UConn, for reference, as number 1 overall seed, got that same Iowa State team that we just ran into on Saturday as their number 2 seed. Iowa State's 5th in KenPom, Who's in front of them at fourth in KenPom? Auburn, the fourth seeded team in UConn's bracket, right? Yale is a dark horse to upset some people in a couple rounds. BYU could get hot and beat anyone. Two teams from the 2023 Final Four, all sitting in UConn's bracket. They got all of that for being the number one overall seed. Carolina has Arizona at 2. Pac-10 champ, Pac-12 champ. I'll show my age there a little bit. Baylor at 3. We saw what that Baylor team can do. Jacoby Walters, totally the kind of guy that can have a Carmelo Anthony, Syracuse type of freshman run there. Alabama at 4. St. Mary's at 5. And like Long Beach State is the 15 seed in Carolina's bracket. Long Beach State's crazy hot right now. Michigan State, I'm sorry, at the 9 seed in that bracket. Michigan State like has all the talent in the world. They just had to put it together. Carolina got a crazy difficult region. They're the 4th and 1 seed. They probably should have, but crazy difficult region. Purdue got Tennessee, SEC regular season champ. Creighton, Kansas at the 4 seed. And you wonder, can Kansas be healthy by weekend 2? Gonzaga's the 5 seed there. McNeese State's a tough 12 out. And I'm telling you right now, I think TCU is the best 9 seed in this tournament. And that's who Purdue would have to play to get out of the first weekend, right? Virginia's a play-in at 10 in that bracket. Texas, with all that talent, is at the 7. If they put it together, who knows? Purdue's got a crazy equal bracket. So, yes, Houston got Marquette, Kentucky, Duke, NC State, Wisconsin. They got talented teams. I get that. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's some sunk cost. You're not going to play a bunch of Division II gimme game schools, right? Those teams don't exist in college basketball anymore. They just don't. And that's why you hear Brett Yormark asking for expansion, but it's also what makes the tournament fun. I think all things considered, the path Houston got could easily play out as being the most favorable. You got Marquette as the 2 seed in your region, but without Tyler Kolek, that team is more like a 6 or an 8 seed. And that's theoretically the second best team you get to play in the South Regional. It's not always that way, but that's theoretically who that is, right? He may be healthy. He may be 75%, whatever. That's a big deal. Okay, Kentucky scores a ton of points. Exciting. The Kentucky brand is also, not exactly, I don't want to say they're allergic to defense. They just don't play it a lot. And frankly, that could mean they go on a high-scoring run, and by the time you would play them in a theoretical Elite Eight matchup, your defense is more tired or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But that also means that horrific defense they play has to get them to that Elite Eight matchup. That doesn't happen very often. Frankly, some of the smaller schools, and we'll talk about this in the second segment, like James Madison is almost the more concerning school in this region, right? Duke has had their ups and downs. They seem to struggle with certain kinds of teams, and I think Houston's one of those kinds of teams that plays hard-nosed, tough defense and gets physical with you. Unless there's a tight whistle in that one, I don't know. I mean, could they lose? Sure. It's part of playing teams in March as teams win and teams lose. I think that I'm picking Houston in that one. The other teams, the A&Ms, the Texas Techs, teams you've played before, you can beat, you're talented enough to beat. I think this is a good region for Houston for all of those reasons. Like Nebraska, people are worried about. Well, Nebraska lost 8 Big Ten games. I think they'll be okay. I know Houston is a little beat up. I know that Iowa State game is very front of mind. Houston won 30 games this season. On the whole, we know they've got talent. And we also know, in looking at this, that you're going to have to play talented teams. I mean, that's part of it, the deal here. And I think the ones that Houston got actually favor our path more than others. I'd rather be the number one seed in the South Regional right now, given the other 64 teams and the other 64 spots, than any of the other 3 spots. I really would. And I think that that's the way you got to look at this, is like, if you're going to be the number one, like, would you flip out this team and that team, or what? Yes. Could you handpick like the worst 8 seed, the worst 9 seed, the worst 5 seed? Yes, you could put all the worst in your bracket. But I think right now, Houston's doing pretty well as far as their seeding goes. They got to do more of it, and I don't mean to say there aren't any challenging teams. In fact, I want to spend the entire second segment talking about challenging teams. However, I also want to talk about putting together a well-oiled machine like the Houston Cougars because this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it farther than the rest, just like any of the new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys are able to take to the next level, and the Nissan SUV to talk about right now are the Houston Cougars that can only be described as an armada. This top seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there, and it's no wonder they're expected to land a top seed in the tournament, which they just did after their first season in the Big 12. You talk about the Tennessee Vols being a pathfinder. The Utah State Aggies are obviously a Nissan Rogue. Whatever the case may be, you can take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go land your next big adventure. All right. I also want to tell you when you're talking about March Madness, where you need to be watching, and that is Fire TV, because that's your destination for sports from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as Fire Stick TV that you can plug into your existing old-fashioned TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes as well as free and live TV, whether it's opening weekend for baseball or this big college basketball tournament we keep talking about. You're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels that deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And yes, that includes all of us here at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the games, analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness, the NBA, to MLB, and more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. I got it going with basketball going right here, right now, next to me. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/locked on Fire TV. All right, I mentioned that there are challenging teams in this, and I hope that I didn't persuade you oh my god, I'm gonna go put my house on every. I'm not necessarily telling you to do that, although we'll talk about FanDuel in a second too. But I do think that Houston overall got a good good bracket, a good fourth of the bracket to themselves in the South Regional. And for what it's worth, the Longwood Lancers in the 16 seed play a slow pace. First glance on Ken Palm stuff, I haven't pulled up video yet, but slow pace, offensive rebound, very elite level. Well, right, sounds like a team you might have heard of. I think that it'll be an interesting game, and hopefully the kind of game that at that slow pace, Houston does not wear themselves out with at the 16 seed. Right now, 16 seeds have beaten one seeds, but I think what you'll see here is hopefully not the challenge I'm thinking of here. In this segment, I'm thinking of if Houston were to meet up with Kentucky in that theoretical Elite Eight matchup, you get to a total clash of styles. And I do think at that point, the wear and tear on Houston that we've gotten us here with is cause for concern. Now, I actually think Kentucky loses earlier in the bracket than that. But if you're talking about teams in the South Regional, that could be challenging. I think about the way Baylor came back in that second half because they're never out of it with that offense, right? That's the kind of team Kentucky will be in the Elite Eight. Houston, with the depth problems they have after injuries, right? You have to imagine will have, some sort of a let up at some point, and you don't want it to be in the second half of that game because Kentucky will score on you. They just will, right? And that kind of fast-paced offense will also kind of be antithetical to what Houston's doing. It'll be more possessions than you're used to playing if you're Houston. And so I wonder, as I look at that, in a theoretical Elite Eight matchup, is that troublesome? There's something about North Carolina State magic they got going on right now. They knocked off other bubble teams by winning so many games in the ACC tournament. Would be a gut-wrenching one to other fans, to older fans, I should say, to older fans that remember Phi Slamma Jam in the 80s. That's like my dad then. But yeah. I will say this much. I have not watched a lot of video on North Carolina State. I know that they needed that great ACC tournament run to get in, um, and they might not have gotten in if it weren't for that. So it kind of depends on what Carolina State you're getting. Um, if that matchup comes up, we'll watch more video on them at that point, I promise. I also think that in a similar vein, Marquette would be a potential Elite Eight matchup as well, the 2 seed in the bracket. If Tyler Kolek is 100% and healthy, yes, they're really good. Now, Shaka Smart has made it that far or further one time as a head coach. I made the Final Four however many years ago that's been at this point. He's at Marquette right now, right? Kolek, you don't know what his health will be like. You don't know what his health will be like. If say he opens up the tournament healthy, but he plays on the injury by the time he gets to that Elite Eight game, what's it look like? 4 games in 2 weeks can do a lot to your body. Um, I can tell you right now, if he's not playing, they're not good. Right, they're fine. They're another tournament team. They're not number 2 seed, right? And so I understand the concern if he's 100% healthy and the matchup problems he is, because frankly, he's a matchup problem from a size perspective, not unlike Momcilovic is from Iowa State for Houston, where it's like, well, who exactly do we get to put on him, right? I think everyone wants me to put Texas A&M in this most challenging spot, and I think that's because they remember what Wade Taylor IV did when these two teams played in December. I do think it's weird that the committee put together what could be a rematch in the second round. Um, I know you're assuming 2 different wins happen and 2 different outcomes or whatever. That still seems early for that from the committee. What I will say is that it's hard to repeat anything like the 36-point performance he had when Houston played A&M in the Toyota Center. And what was truly a neutral floor. I mean, 4 schools were selling out Toyota Center for the game, the Texas LSU game before that, and the A&M Houston game afterwards. But I would also point out that even if you repeated that 36-point performance, Houston still won that game, right? Now, that 36 points is largely fueled by a bunch of late isolation buckets in that game. Obviously, Houston would have the film from it and some different things to watch on what spots he got to. Um, I don't know that I'm necessarily ready to put them on to the second game from A&M in the same way some people are already pointing that out. But you've already played them on a neutral floor, and their best player had a best game of his life. Even to this point, he's had some tremendous performances in the SEC this year, and it's still like one of his best games of his life. And you beat them. You're okay, right? You have a game plan. Can they beat Houston? Sure, I guess. It's March, right? We've seen Fairleigh Dickinson, right? Like these things happen, but I'm not betting on that one. I wouldn't be concerned about that. The thing I think though that, and this will be where I end the segment on most challenging, the dark horse in the region. I'm not saying they're 2021 Houston or 2019 Houston or anything like that. But James Madison feels like a wild card. James Madison is 31-3. They knocked off Michigan State to start the season. They're really, really, really good at what they do, right? And for a 12 seed, you always see a 12 seed beat a 5 every year. So you can kind of just write them past Wisconsin, because I think that's the 12 seed that I'm putting, if you're asking me, right? James Madison feels really, really good. I kind of can't believe, we're talking about if you want to get nitpicky, Houston feels like they drew the best 12 seed in the bunch. I mean, McNeese might beat Gonzaga, but I don't think so. Grand Canyon, I don't think will beat St. Mary's, but I think I'm thinking pretty highly of St. Mary's, but and then San Diego State, I think maybe I'm putting too much faith in what they're doing over there, but UAB is in because they won the American Athletic Conference tournament. It's kind of the reason they're in the 12th seed. I think San Diego State gets past them. I really do think James Madison is the best 12 seed. And that would be a potential Sweet 16 matchup with Houston. So you also catch them a little bit earlier. James Madison, frankly, would have several days to prepare for how they're going to attack Houston's defense and offense. I guess Houston's defense is probably more important for them. That's a potential scary matchup that I don't think people are talking about in this region. And we'll get to it if we get to it, right? Got to take care of Longwood, right? Frankly, you don't want to be Virginia or Purdue and lose that opening round game to a 16 seed, because it can happen. And frankly, we saw our own issues with 16 seed a year ago. We ended up winning the game, but it was not pretty. But there are challenges in this region. Well, I think it's favorable. I do think you got to kind of keep some balance there. And speaking of balance, I want to talk some in the last segment about the Big 12 getting screwed in this tournament a little bit. But first, let's make sure we talk about, as we talk about all these Big 12 schools, different places that students of these schools can go find jobs, or you can find the finely educated students at these different universities for your small business. Because if you're hiring for your small business, you want to find qualified, quality professionals that are right for that role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools you need to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. And LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats that you may not have time or resources to make that hire. That's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature helps you write job descriptions, make the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/locked-on-college. linkedin.com/locked-on-college. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so the Big 12 spent all year being the best team in the net, the best team in the KenPom. For a chunk of the year, they had Kansas or Houston at the number one team overall in the country in the AP and coaches poll, which we had Baylor in the top 10 at various points, Iowa State in the top 10 at various points. Shoot, at one point, I feel like Texas was there to start the season. BYU came in the top 25. Oklahoma spent a chunk of the year in the top 25. That'll be more important in a second. The Big 12 is really good at basketball. TCU really good at basketball, right? Houston obviously really good at basketball, but even these dark horse teams, I mean, we don't think of Texas Tech as a basketball powerhouse, but they were just in the national championship game in 2019, and they've been in the top 25 for most of this season as well with this kid named Pop Isaacs. I look at the Big 12 and I think it's clear that their 14-team conference right now is the best in America. And they did put the most teams in with 8. I should point out that they still did. There was a tie with the SEC and have the most teams in the conference tournament with 8, and the national basketball tournament with 8. But I can't help but look at it and feel like Oklahoma, which the committee officially listed as one of the first 4 out, got a little screwed. And I think I'm also obviously judging that because like I paid close attention to them leading up to the Houston game, and then in the Houston game, and that game was as close as it was. I mean, Houston the buzz beater to win the game. But Oklahoma spent a large chunk of the year in the top 25 and got it into the single digits at one point. Right now, I know their non-conference resume was not like the greatest, but they played in the Big 12, and I look at the same thing. I mean, the SEC teams that got in the same way. Now, I would point out that to SEC folks out there like to chant SEC and ride on the shoulders of the team's success. Only one of the 2 teams leaving the Big 12 made it into the tournament. That's Texas, and I frankly don't know how far I'm picking Texas to go in this thing. They kind of have a tough matchup out the gates with Virginia potentially. I mean, Virginia could hold them to like 12 points. But 2 of the 4 teams coming in to the Big 12 next year also made the tournament in Colorado and Arizona. I was surprised Utah did not make it. I'm not on the committee. I was impressed by Utah earlier this season. I haven't really followed them since, so maybe that's a crazy statement to make. But I kind of assumed when I saw them earlier this season, it looked like a tournament type team. So technically, the Big 12 continues to get better at basketball next season. And technically, in terms of next year's programs, the Big 12 does have the most. The Big 12 would have 9, where the it would be 9-9, right? But I just feel like this is a product of like that NC State run we opened talking about, right? This is a product of, having to put both St. Mary's and Gonzaga from the smaller conference because they're both kind of built up programs that are going to be there every year, right? Um, I could go on and on about like Virginia and does Virginia deserve to be there or whatever. I think the Big East folks are complaining that they only have a couple teams in this thing. I do wonder though if they expanded this thing out to the 76 teams that your Mark was referencing the other day. Would you get like 2 or 3 more Big 12 teams in if you went out that far with it? I think you at least get one in Oklahoma, but would you also get to add a Cincinnati or also get to add, I don't know, I was about to say West Virginia, Oklahoma State. Those two teams aren't very good. But you could add a Utah, right? And I think the big thing here for us is that the Big 12 tournament and the Big 12 conference is supposed to be like the calling card for Houston basketball right now, right? I mean, moving in this conference and win this conference regular season championship outright was a big deal. And I have to say that it's fun to have Drake at the seeding watch party. It's fun to get number 1 seeds, etc. But it also is a badge of honor to come in and do this with this basketball league at the start. And it feels like the league almost got slighted because Houston did that, right? If Texas had Houston's resume, I think the Big 12 has a 9th team in Oklahoma. If Oklahoma had Houston's resume and Houston had Oklahoma's resume, I don't think that would change anything. But I do think that because Houston and BYU and Baylor and Iowa State did what they did, as opposed to Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, I don't know. I do think that steered this in a way where people are like, well, I don't think we need that 9th Big 12. I do think that overall came back to like change the perception of the conference when truly all you're doing there is putting a different brand on the same resume. I mean, if Texas had won 30 games, we would be talking about the Big 12 as like this is the best conference ever put together of all time, right? We'd be looking, I mean, if Oklahoma had done what Iowa State did and mollywopped Houston in the conference championship games, I'm like, what a great Big 12 team that is, and like all those kinds of things, right? Instead, we're talking about like Iowa State is like this sneaky team, right? And it's just a little bit different the way the national perception of it is going. And I know that the team doesn't care, and I don't need people in the comments going, "Oh, Kelvin Sampson." No, Kelvin Sampson doesn't care. Their job is to win basketball games. Their job is to win basketball games, and I think they're very, very good at that job, right? But as you and I sitting here talking about it, because that's what we do every day, we talk about basketball or talk about Houston Cougar football or talk about whatever's going on. It is a thing to talk about. Like, what is the conversation? How is the conversation different? And frankly, is the conversation being impacted by, for like a better phrase, brand names? And I just think it's interesting. I feel like the Big 12 was being called not a strong conference this year. It was the year before that. When truthfully, it was just different teams at the top. It wasn't Kansas. It wasn't Texas. It was us. It was Iowa State. It was Baylor. It was BYU. And maybe it's a lot of nothing. Maybe I'm being silly. Maybe you agree. Tell me in the comments down below, whichever way you go with that. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. Locked on Cougs is a prime Locked On podcast. Your team, our number 1 in the South, Houston Cougars, each and every day. Go Cougs.